All right, so we're looking at 1 Kings 10. Today I'm going to try to pick up the speed, try to cover maybe a chapter at a time as we get into details of Kings and a lot of narrative instead of the prayers and different things. So 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9 are almost identical. There's only one or two phrases different. And so I'm just going to stick with 1 Kings 10 today. And theme this, God delivers what he promised. It's a little more complicated than that. And I think as we read the life of Solomon, I heard it described that he's an anomaly, kind of like a Samson is an anomaly, which is there's a normal pattern of things, and then there's someone who breaks the mold. And it seems like Solomon's there, like he is really high spiritually and really low spiritually, and he's the same guy. And then he gives us, after the really low spiritual, where his heart's turned away from God, he writes 2 books of the Bible at least after the fact that he had walked away from God. And so he had to have come back to God at the end of life, and he writes Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon then. And I'm probably going to teach those books, Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. We're talking about maybe a Sunday morning, Sunday school, maybe next year, where we study them. Probably those 2 books are the most obscure books that Solomon has written that we don't really know what they mean, and maybe uncomfortable, especially Song of Solomon, that you're like, I can't believe he's talking about this. This is in the Bible. Is this should this be in the Bible? But I think adults and especially older teens need the wisdom that Solomon's going to give us from those 2 books. And if you don't know what they are, what they're about, it's hard to know how to interpret them and then how to give the wisdom that God wants us to know through Solomon. That if we don't know what those books are about, we can't glean the wisdom and then apply it to our lives. So when it comes to wisdom, what does it do for us? When someone is a very wise person, let's say someone knows how to handle money. They're wise in how to handle money, not foolish. You think the prodigal son, he gets a lot of money. What's he do with it? Blows it. What do people that are 19 years old and they get a multi-million-dollar contract because they're in sports or they're in a movie star, and they get this huge contract and they're 19 years old and they get $3 million. What do they do with it? It's gone. Elaborate vacations, whatever, bad real estate investments, all kinds of stuff that ways to blow money. But a wise person, how does a wise person handle money? If you looked at a wise person's finances, we would come to this conclusion. The way they handle money is orderliness. They know how to track it coming in. They know how to track it going out, and they're putting their money in things that's going up in value for the most part. And so they're using that money, if it's $3 million, to make $30 million in the course of their lifetime. Okay. So and that happens over, because of wisdom, equals orderliness. Now, how does a wise person conduct themselves in relationships? Their relationships are very orderly. How does a wise person drive a car? In a very orderly way, not reckless. So wisdom equals orderliness. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we watch Solomon and as people are being drawn to his kingdom from all over the world. I looked at how far the Queen of Sheba came to see him. Now, this is not on a plane. This is not in a car, not in a speedboat. She is likely, if she's got this entourage of a lot of people, maybe she's carried. If you imagine in the Middle East, the people that are carried on poles and they're sitting on a platform. If her servants are carrying her, okay, they're walking 2,000 miles through the edge, probably likely the edge of Saudi Arabia, a desert on one side and the ocean on the other side, and they're walking through the heat. Maybe they're walking at night, so it's not as hot, but 2,000 miles. And how long would it take? They walk 30 miles a day, which is a very long way to walk. It's months that they're walking to get there, but it's worth it to her. Okay. What is drawing the nations to Solomon is his wisdom and his wealth, but it's more likely his wisdom. How is he getting his wealth? Because of his wisdom. And people are paying to get into his presence. Kings and other people are paying him just to sit and listen to his wisdom. And then they give him millions of dollars worth of gold for this privilege of sitting and listening to his wisdom. Where does he get his wisdom from? God. And he asked God for wisdom. And God said, I'll not only give you wisdom, I'll also give you the wealth. So wisdom and wealth go together. God promised it. God delivers what he promised. But Solomon doesn't have wisdom in every category of life. Well, we know his relationships. Why would a wise person marry 1,000 women?
That's
No.
very wise.
We all look at that and say, what a fool. Okay. He's got this wisdom to handle money, but there was something not right in him marrying all these women. And there's also something not right about him disobeying a couple clear commands that we pointed out already from Deuteronomy. So let's see what First Kings chapter 10 tells us about why the Queen of Sheba comes. And she is mentioned in the New Testament. And we'll talk a little bit about her and how we interpret her coming. And then the second half of the chapter talks about all the other wealth that Solomon has. And he is able to attract the rest of the world, it says, comes to hear him. So let's look at 1 Kings 10 and verse 1. Now, when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, we'll stop there. If you remember that Solomon's sending ships out of the south part of his kingdom, and if you look at the map, they're going along Saudi Arabia, and they've got to go out into the ocean next to the Queen of Sheba's kingdom. Sheba is likely Yemen. You look at where Yemen is on the map, south of Saudi Arabia. The ships that Solomon are sending out with Hiram are going near her kingdom. And so if it's not Solomon's servants and Hiram that are telling all the people along the way, there is an unbelievably wise king up there. He has got unbelievable wealth. We built this temple that has $1 billion worth of gold in one room. You hear that, you're like, I've never can imagine that. And so what is this kingdom like? And you hear this wealth of this kingdom up north in Israel, and she's saying, okay, and she's a wise lady. There was a category of people that were wise, and they were likely wealthy people. They didn't have to do manual labor. They had people working for them, and they could sit around and they'd get all these books and philosophers, and they'd read them, and they'd be in this category of wise people. She's one of these leaders, but she's also in this likely category of wise people. So they try to get together as much as possible with other wise people. We do this today on the internet. We do this on YouTube. If you want wisdom on how to do anything around your house, I do this too. I think I can change the brakes on my car. I watch it, I'm like, nope, I can't do that. You probably watch YouTube videos and you thought, yes, I can, or no, I would never be able to create that with the tools they have. I don't have those tools. With the wisdom they have, I don't have that wisdom. I'm going to attempt it. I'm not going to attempt it based on a video. Okay, we do that. We interact with wise people all the time. And we realize we can either imitate them or no, I got to call somebody to do this repair or that because I don't have that wisdom. They didn't have YouTube, or she would be watching Solomon's YouTube videos on wisdom. So instead of that, she's got to go to his, and she's calculating, is it worth the journey to go that far walking. Is it going to be worth it? And she assumes it's going to be worth it, worth the journey. I'm going to go. It's going to be a trip of a lifetime. And we'll see how she responds when she gets there. What else is drawing her? Not just Solomon's fame, but it's Solomon's fame. And this is where Chronicles doesn't mention this phrase, but Kings does. Look at verse 1. She hears of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. I'm not sure exactly what that means. We're not given an example. She does say what she says, explaining it later about, and she uses Yahweh's name. Okay, so the merchants, Solomon's servants, somebody who has come by her kingdom a couple times on trade routes, she has heard that Solomon has all of this wealth and wisdom because he is a servant of Yahweh, the name of God. And so she comes and is expecting to learn about Yahweh. But we also have the reason why she comes in verse 1. She came to test him with hard questions. Okay, it is one thing for us to serve Yahweh, God, who knows all things. Okay, so if you know all things, then I got these questions. And we have a question today, like, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Okay, that's a question that a lot of people want an answer to. And I heard a response to this. Yeah, he does. He allowed it one time. One time, yeah, there was only one good person, and he volunteered to be bad as Jesus. Okay, so as a way of evangelizing with that question, so we're all bad people. Oh, I thought we were all good people. And bad things that, like I said Sunday about we're all sufferers instead of sinners. No, we're all sinners, and we suffer because we're sinners. And we complicate it when we sin more in our suffering. But we have hard questions. And Solomon's going to have a lot of hard questions himself as he wrestles through issues with Ecclesiastes and all the wisdom that God gives him. But she's expecting to hear of the name of Yahweh, and she comes to test Solomon with hard questions. It's likely these other philosophers in the world, the other leaders, have questions that no one has a satisfactory answer to. So she comes to get her questions answered. Verse 2. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. We're told how much gold, 120 talents. A talent is 75 pounds. So thousands of pounds of gold with her. Spices, the southern part of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula is known for its frankincense and myrrh. So whenever you see the wise men bringing Jesus gold, frankincense, and myrrh, frankincense and myrrh were grown and manufactured and produced in this area. So she was known for being a queen of this kingdom that is known for frankincense and myrrh, especially. And they would use that strong perfume to trade to get gold. And so if the Solomon ships are going past her kingdom constantly and they're going out somewhere, Ophir, wherever that is, to get gold, as they come back through, if they want to get frankincense and myrrh, all they do is stop at her kingdom. Hey, can we trade some gold or whatever else we got from these other countries to get some frankincense and myrrh? Oh, sure. And so they trade and the ships come back through, but in them passing through her kingdom, near her kingdom, she's finding out about the wisdom of Solomon and his wealth. So she wants to see it with her own eyes. And she comes with a huge amount of people, gold, precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. So she's asking him all the questions. She's probably got them in writing. I've got all these questions that these other wise people that I've interacted with, they can't give me answers. And I heard that you have wisdom, you also have wealth. And so I'm going to bring you some wealth in exchange for answers. But there's some connection, some desire for her to know about the name of Yahweh. Okay, you can see that there in verse 1. And the king's analysis here of it, at verse 3, Solomon answered all her questions. Now, there's no parent, no philosopher that can answer everybody's question satisfactorily. There's always going to become a question that you're like, you know what? I don't have an answer to that. There's things that too hard for us to answer. So what do we do? Can you give me a week? That's usually what I do. If you guys ask me a question, can you give me a week? Because I don't know who this person is, or this book that you're reading, or this person on YouTube that you're watching. I don't know about their ministry. Can you give me a week and let me do some research, and I'll come back with maybe a satisfactory answer, maybe not. It'll at least satisfy me, but it may not satisfy you. And if not, give me longer. So there are questions that we had that we try to get answers to. But Solomon, on the spot, is able to answer all her questions. So much so that Kings continues in verse 3 by saying, there was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And if he was going to give her the reason why he has the explanation, it's because of the name of Yahweh, and she's like, how did you get so wise? And he would have to say, what? Well, when I was a young man, I asked Yahweh for wisdom. And what you're hearing is Yahweh's wisdom. Yahweh is the creator of the ends of the earth. He knows exactly how many fish there are in the sea, and how many birds there are in the sky, and how high the highest mountain is, and how low the depths. He knows all things. And so when I asked him for wisdom, he gave me the ability to put all of this information, how things operate, together. And I did that so that I could serve him in this place. And he promised me not only wisdom, but wealth. And so when the Queen of Sheba, verse 4, had seen all the wisdom of Solomon. So she heard the wisdom of Solomon in verse 3, but wisdom is seen. How can we see wisdom? And I mentioned earlier, when we watch an orderly life, when someone has their act together, we would say, their marriage is solid, their finances are solid, their work ethic is solid, all of their house is in order, their yard is in order, that person has some degree of wisdom. Okay, wisdom equals orderliness. So she hears Solomon's wisdom and giving her all the answers to all her questions, and then she didn't come just to hear it, she came so she could see it. Okay, and that's what we see here, that you don't just want to hear about someone as wise, and you don't want just your questions answered. She wants to see it with her own eyes. She wants to see wisdom and what it looks like in a kingdom, because she wants to learn from it and structure her kingdom along the same line. So verse 4, she sees all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he built. So she gives her a tour of what he can show her of the temple. And oh, I'm sorry, the house is the house where he's living. It took him 13 years to build. The food at his table, the seating of his officials, the attendance of his servants, what they wore, their clothing, his cupbearers, his burnt offerings. So he had to take her to the temple where she could see how they offered burnt offerings morning and evening at the house of Yahweh. And there was no more breath in her. She has a jaw-dropping experience. She hears that Solomon's really wise. She knows he's wealthy. She comes, she sees the wealth, she hears the wisdom, and then she starts taking this tour, and she's like, unbelievable. Down to what the servants are wearing and how they serve. She's like, okay, everything is in order, not just a little bit, but Solomon uses his wisdom to have almost a perfectly ordered kingdom from the outsider's perspective. Hopefully Solomon, and likely he's giving Yahweh the credit for this, down to the worship, everything is just orderly. And verse 6, here's her analysis. She's marveling, but now we get what she's thinking, her response. She says to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports. I'm like, this is too good to be true. There's no kingdom like this, she probably thought, until I came and my own eyes have seen it. And behold, The half was not told me. Okay, there's only so much you can get from someone's description until you see it. Okay, until you like the eclipse. It was really cool to look and see the moon coming in front of the sun, and almost from where we were at here, almost completely like, oh, that is so amazing. God is amazing to make the moon and the sun, and then randomly in a very orderly way, we can tell exactly when the next eclipse is going to happen. That God is an amazing creator. But whenever you see with your own eyes something, the response has got to be like the Queen of Sheba. The half of it wasn't even told me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpass the report that I heard. So it's blown her away. And then she says, here's my analysis. Happy are your men. Now, 2 Chronicles says wives in ESV, but it's probably not the best translation. It's probably the first thing she says is not happy are all of your wives, because I doubt a lot of Solomon's wives were happy. And the Hebrew doesn't support, it is more likely men. And so Kings has it this way. Happy are your men, the people that are around you, that are part of this big machine called your kingdom. They are happy because they get to hear you. Okay, they're close to you and they get to hear you talk, and they get to see how you organize things, and like, man, I wish I had this kind of wisdom. Have you ever worked with a really, really good boss and you wanted him or her to teach you, like, man, and there have been a few in my life that I really admired and wanted to emulate because of how wise they were. That's what she's saying here. Happy are your men, happy are your servants who continually stand before you and they hear your wisdom. They get to see what we had to travel so far to see. They get to be part of this kingdom, and it's so orderly, it's so wise. They hear your wisdom, they see your wisdom. And then she gives this analysis of what she thinks about God. Verse 9, blessed be the Lord, Yahweh your God. She's blessing the Lord who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. And here's something unique to Kings that's not in Chronicles. She says this, bless the Lord, or bless Yahweh, or because Yahweh loved Israel forever, he has made you king. Here is, she is an unsaved pagan lady maybe before. She's drawn to the kingdom to hear answers to questions, to see it for herself, but something about the name of the Lord draws her in verse 1. When she sees it, maybe she hears his answers, and she sees that Solomon is only wise and exercising wisdom because the Lord has given him this wisdom. She wants to worship Yahweh too. I think she's a believer. I get this question of, is she really a believer? Naaman the Syrian is similar to her story, and he's drawn for healing, but sounds like he worships Yahweh. Ruth the Moabitess comes and she starts worshiping God as well. But here it's Solomon's wisdom that draws her. He gives credit to the Lord. She then praises God and says, blessed be Yahweh your God, who's delighted in you, set you on the throne of Israel. Because Yahweh loved Israel forever, he has made you king. She's realizing this is a special kingdom. Yahweh's hand is on this place. And he has put you, Solomon, in charge of this. And then she concludes this with that you may execute justice and righteousness. And if Solomon was true to magnify God, if someone says, you guys have a really righteous church or really righteous life, we would say the only reason we're righteous is because God made us righteous through Christ. Okay, so we reflect glory back to God, and that's hopefully what Solomon did here in wisdom, reflecting glory back to God. And she says, blessed be the Lord. And when an unsaved person says that in the Bible, usually that's a salvation testimony of how God's showing us that how they respond is, do an unsaved person want to bless the Lord and give God credit for all that she sees. No, usually they don't. But here she is. Verse 10, then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, which was millions and millions of dollars worth of gold, and a very great quantity of spices, because that's what her kingdom is known for, and precious stones. Never again came such an abundance of spices as these that the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So she brings so much spices, and we expect that because that's what her kingdom is known for growing and producing, are these spices. It also says in verse 11, moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, or Ophir brought from Ophir a very great amount of almug wood and precious stones. And the king made from that wood supports for the house of the Lord. So it could be pillars or stairs, something that supported it or added to the external beauty of the temple. And for the king's house, and also lyres and harps. Lyres are like guitars. Harps for the singers. No such almug wood has come or been seen to this day. So a kingdom that's known for almug wood brought it. I don't know exactly what almug wood looks like. I didn't look that up. But if it was similar, like mahogany or some other cedar, would have been beautiful. And then verse 13, and King Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatever she asked besides what was given her by the bounty of King Solomon. So she turned and went back to her own land with her servants. So he gave her anything she wanted, like anything in my kingdom that you want. She gives him a massive amount of money, and he trades that. So they trade wisdom, they trade stories, they trade questions and answers. And then he blows her away with the wealth and the wisdom and the orderliness of his kingdom. So all of this is unparalleled wealth and wisdom. We'll see the rest of this. We're not going to have time to look at verses 14 to 22, but Solomon makes shields. Each of these, the large shields, I think $480,000 worth of gold in one shield. The large shield, the smaller ones, $100,000 worth of gold in one shield. These shields are amazing, but Rehoboam, Solomon's son, loses them, and King of Egypt comes and wipes him out. Okay, so wealth is extremely it's like water, trying to hold water in your hands. It's like he got all this wealth and he makes all of the extraordinary shields, and then his son loses them. Yeah. And so why? Because he wasn't wise. And Solomon doesn't pass on wisdom. He tries to pass on wisdom with Proverbs, as he writes, my son, my son, my son. But Solomon's choices, and a few times where he's not wise, that speaks volumes to his kids and his grandkids. Of here is a man, and it speaks volumes to us as we look and evaluate his life. Like, wow, I would have loved, and if we had a field trip to Solomon's kingdom, we'd all be the first to sign up. Like, yeah, let's go see what $1 billion worth of gold looks like. Let's go see the magnificence of the temple and this house and all of what the servants dress like. If it took the Queen of Sheba's breath away, it's going to take our breath away too. Okay, we would be all like, can you imagine that? No, we would be talking about it for days and weeks. And she's talking about it probably all the way home, and as she gets back, sending other wise people Solomon's way. So let's look at verse 23. Thus Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. And because he does, and we get samples of how much money he gets. Oh, I skipped verse 14. The weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. That's $1.6 billion of revenue that's just coming into his kingdom, besides that which came from the explorers and from the business merchants and from all the kings of the West and from the governors of the land. So I don't know where he's getting this money, likely from his people, taxes. But he's got a very wealthy kingdom in order for them to give him $1.6 billion worth of gold, plus all that he goes out and gets and brings back in. So he is unbelievably wealthy, a trillionaire. And today there's no trillionaires alive. He's got more money than anyone alive has. And so because God gave it to him, talks about the wealth of his kingdom and what he does with a lot of that wealth. Anything he wants to build, he builds, and he puts all kinds of gold into it. His drinking vessels are made of gold. He doesn't even, silver is not for Solomon. Silver is not even considered anything in the days of Solomon. Verse 21 says, because there's so much gold there. Thus Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his mind. And every one of the kings of the earth who want to get some of Solomon's wisdom, they bring with them when they come to hear Solomon. They bring silver and gold and garments and myrrh and spices and horses and mules, so much year by year. So every year Solomon's got a waiting list of kings of the earth who are traveling an incredible amount of mileage to come. And the Queen of Sheba may have been the most wealthy, or she may have been maybe the only godly one after she left. But all of the kings want to follow the Queen of Sheba in coming to hear him. Verse 26, and Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Think, oh, that's not multiplying horses, which we had seen before. But remember, Deuteronomy says, don't get horses from Egypt. Verse 27, and the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as sycamore of the Shephelah. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt. And Q. And the king's traders received them from Q at a price, and chariots could be imported for Egypt for 600 shekels of silver. Remember, silver is as common as gravel is here. So it's nothing for Solomon to get that many horses or chariots. So through the king's traders, they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Assyria. So the wealth and wisdom of Solomon attracts the whole earth, like the Queen of Sheba was attracted. Unparalleled riches. God fulfills his promise to Solomon with unparalleled riches, unparalleled wisdom in verses 23 to 25. But God told Solomon, don't collect horses, especially from Egypt. And as the Kings records this story, it seems like God's blessing Solomon, but God doesn't give Solomon horses. Look at verse 26. Solomon gathered together horses. God gives Solomon wealth and wisdom, but he will never give us something that disobeys his word. And so as Solomon disobeys God's word, Solomon's going outside of God's word, wanting to do his own thing because he's got wealth. He wants to be a horse trader, a chariot trader. He's going to make more money. Anything is fair game except for what God has clearly said. Don't go to Egypt to get horses. And where does he get horses from? Where God said not to. So there's a question that some have raised whether the Queen of Sheba was a believer. I'm leaning towards she is because of how Jesus refers to her. Jesus refers to the Ninevites and the Queen of Sheba in Matthew 12 and Luke 11. And I'll read Luke 11:31. It says, the Queen of the South, which is the Queen of Sheba, will rise up at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. So I don't see ever in the future that unsaved people are judging other unsaved people. But I do see Christians judging the world or angels. So if she is rising up and condemning someone else, what I think Jesus is trying to say to the religious leaders and Jewish people of his day is, compared to the Queen of Sheba, you guys are condemned, and she's going to be part of this condemnation. And the Ninevites are also going to be used to condemn. So here are Assyrians, which were awful people in the Old Testament, but yet they repented at when Jonah came. And if we look at Jonah's story, it sounds like the Ninevites are believers, at least for one generation until they turn again. But when it comes to the Queen of Sheba, what she says about God sounds like how God's faithful people talk to him or about him. Blessed be Yahweh, who has made you king. And when Jesus says she's going to rise up in the judgment and she's going to condemn Pharisees and Sadducees and chief priests and scribes, people who are definitely Jewish and knew the Old Testament law and tried to obey it, he's saying she is righteous and you guys aren't. Okay. And it says here in Luke 11:31, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, something greater than Solomon is here. But with the king's analysis of what she said and what drew her is she had hard questions of Solomon, but she also was drawn to Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. And if Solomon witnessed to her and gave God credit, and then she blesses God, I won't be surprised. I can't say dogmatically, but I won't be surprised at all to see the Queen of Sheba in heaven. And based on what we see a little bit about her and the Ninevites, and how Jesus talked about them, Jesus obviously would have known who is in heaven as he comes to earth, to know that she's going to be part of the judgment on Jewish people who rejected him. And when he says something greater than Solomon is here, and you look back at Kings, and the Pharisees and the scribes knew the Old Testament, and they saw that no one was wiser or more wealthy than Solomon. And here Jesus says, something greater than Solomon is here. He's pointing to himself. Like, they rejected him. Okay, the world came to Solomon because they loved the wisdom and the riches and to see it. And something greater than Solomon is here. The Son of God was here, and they rejected him. And it sounds like Jesus used the Queen of Sheba and the Ninevites to say, they didn't reject God, but you are, because you're rejecting me. So based on that, I would assume that she's a believer. But you may have other questions, and we can talk about